Good day, colleagues all over the world. Welcome to the FAN Virtual Colloquium on promoting a sustainable future, the role of archives and cultural heritage institutions. So this is the fourth and also the last virtual colloquium. We started this virtual series of gatherings in April with the impact of politics on governance and natural archives. The second session was on AI, digital technology, and natural archives. And the last one in September was on shared archival heritage, politics, and the way forward. As I just mentioned, this last one in December is on promoting sustainable future, the role of archives and cultural heritage institution. Our moderator for today is Jürgen Vervoorts, and he will moderate this session. Please, Jürgen, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Rita. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. We have 4 fantastic speakers today to talk us through this topic of sustainability. But before we are going to start, there are a couple of technical things I would like to draw your attention to. For any question, we will take and discuss questions right at the end of the sessions. We will go through all 4 talks to start with. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function on your screen, not the chat. The Q&A will be for questions, and I will keep an eye on that, and I will try to
y voy a tratar de hablar en estas preguntas. En la parte de preguntas en el chat, al lado del chat, no usen el chat. Y también pueden usar interpretación en distintos idiomas. Si no pueden ver,
si vous ne voyez pas le bouton, cherchez
somewhere on your screen, probably bottom right corner, more with 3 dots. There should be interpretation on there. Please use that for the interpretation function. And I think this now is all I have to say on the introduction. And I would now like to invite our first
ahora
speaker,
quiero invitar a nuestro la primera persona que va a hablar, que es José Luis Pedersoli. José Luis tiene una formación de química de polímeros y se centra en la conservación del patrimonio en papel. Trabajó como científico de la conservación en el Instituto Holandés del Patrimonio Cultural y en el ICCROM. Ha llevado a cabo un amplio trabajo internacional sobre la gestión de riesgos para el patrimonio cultural desde 2005, incluidas nuevas tecnologías y herramientas, y muchos van a estar familiarizados. Y hoy, José Luis van a hablar sobre...
Il va nous parler aujourd'hui de comment combler le fossé, relier le développement durable aux activités liées aux fonds archivistiques. Et il va regarder toutes les différentes questions liées au rôle des archives et institutions connexes dans ce domaine à ce moment critique et très important dans notre vie. À vous, José Luis.
Thank you so much, Jürgen.
Merci beaucoup, Jürgen.
So first of all, I'd like to thank ICA for the invitation, for the opportunity to participate in today's session. So allow me to share my screen. Yes, so before jumping into the presentation, I would just like to say 2 words about ICROM, my organization, which is an intergovernmental organization that works for 138 member states around the world with the mission to protect and promote cultural heritage in all its forms. And that, of course, includes documentary heritage in archives. And if you're interested in learning more about ICROM, you can just have a look at our website. I would like to start with the reflection. So taking a step back and looking at our world today, where we face a number of challenges such as climate change, loss of biodiversity, inequalities, and intolerance. And we know that without concrete action, our people and our planet cannot thrive. So in that bigger picture context, I think a pertinent question for our sector is how can archives and other heritage organizations contribute to a sustainable future? In the sense that it's not only important to be sustainable as an organization, but also to be a player, you know, in contributing to a sustainable future. So how can we achieve that? I think a clear answer at the global level is the so-called Agenda 2030 put forward by the United Nations in 2015, and all member states of the United Nations signed up for this agenda. And it is an agenda for transforming our world in view of the challenges I mentioned. And it has a time horizon of 2030. So by 2030, we are supposed to have done something substantial to transform our world and without leaving anyone behind. And given that, so where do archives and heritage organizations fit in? And what can we do about it? So inside the agenda, we have the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs for short, which are an action framework, that shows different ways, different paths through which we can achieve and transform ourselves, transform our organizations, transform our society, and to help achieve that sustainable future for everyone, including not kind of fighting against poverty in its multidimensional nature, reducing or eliminating hunger, improving our health and well-being, education, gender equality. So each one of these so-called SDGs provides an action-oriented way that we can follow to transform our world. And I think the question here, the reflection here, is how can archives contribute to these different SDGs? Again, not only in terms of transforming the archives themselves in the terms of how they operate, but also helping through the work of the archives, improve things and change the society in a positive way, to support the communities they serve. So we have 17 goals. It's also important to have in mind that inside each of these goals, there are targets. So I'm showing here as an example, SDG number 16, which is about peace, justice, and strong institutions. Inside this SDG, there are a number of targets that you can see here on screen. And I think it's very important as we start to think how archives can contribute, how libraries and museums can contribute to sustainable development. It's very important to have a clear understanding of these targets, to familiarize ourselves, to know what these targets want to achieve. For instance, if we take here target number 16.10, it has to do with ensuring public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms. This is very close to the work of the archives, for instance. And there are many other targets where we are already contributing and we can contribute more. So it's very important to connect the dots, as we say, between the mission, the work of the archives and the sustainable development targets. As we start to make these connections, it becomes clear what we are already doing and what else can we do across the different SDGs. So in order to help archives, libraries, and museums to bridge that gap, to make that connection between their work with their collections and sustainable development, ICCROM has launched in 2020 this program called Our Collections Matter. And the idea here is that by providing tools, meaningful tools, by providing training and building capacity, and by helping transform organizations and transform the sector, we will be able to reposition ourselves as heritage organizations and be recognized as important players in sustainable development. Again, there are like two ways to do that. There's an internal component in where the organizations will transform themselves, become more environmentally sustainable in terms of procurement, in terms of waste management, staffing policies. So there's the internal component. And there's a very important one, another component that has to do with supporting and transforming, helping transform in a positive way the communities of users, of the communities we serve through our work with archives and museums and libraries. So that's the idea. And at the basis is a clear understanding of the agenda, and then have available the tools, the knowledge, and the motivation to kind of look at our work from the sustainable development perspective and reposition ourselves, and also communicate our work from the sustainable development perspective and find new ways to contribute more, to make stronger contributions. This is what this program is trying to achieve. In order to do that, under the component of providing tools, we have created an online toolkit. So here on screen, you can see the front page of the toolkit, where today there are more than 600 tools from the heritage sector, but also from outside, which collections-based organizations such as archives, libraries, and museums can use to support and to strengthen their work and their collaboration across the different SDGs. So you can look for tools for specific SDGs, for specific sustainable development-oriented actions. There's a wealth of tools there. I have the address here on the top right, and I invite everyone to take a look and explore the toolkit. Here, just a few, there are specific resources that connect to archives. So here I'm showing some examples of that, and also other resources that do not have specifically archives as their audience target, but can be very useful for the work of archives, both, comprising aspects of environmental sustainability, social and economic. And in order to put that into practice, we have been working every year with about 30 organizations, including archives. So the pins there are the organizations and their countries.
Qui montre
the world. And the red pins are archives that have already participated in this initiative and would like to have more archives participating, where we work together to first introduce the 2030 agenda, to gain a stronger, better understanding of the sustainable development targets, and then start to look for these tools and put them into practice, so that through this training, the organizations can transform themselves, so the professionals can transform themselves, the organizations can transform themselves, and with that global transformation, we can also transform our sector. We can transform the archive sector and the heritage sector, again, to be a stronger player for sustainable development in terms of connecting the dots, being more aware of how and where the work can contribute, but also telling our story, communicating what we do from the sustainable development perspective. Another tool that we have launched is a so-called self-assessment tool. And you see here also the front page, the address is there on screen. By taking the self-assessment, you can see where your archive today is contributing to sustainable development and where there are gaps and opportunities to do more and to do better. So it's a series of questions. Each question connects to one sustainable development target. And as you take the self-assessment, you get a result like this, which shows the different SDG targets. The ones that appear in color are the targets to which you are already contributing to, and those that appear without color or in gray are the targets that you are not yet contributing to, and that shows you opportunities to do more, to contribute more through the work of your organization. So it provides a baseline, a snapshot of where you are today, and also a way to say, okay, we are already contributing to these SDG targets, which is not always obvious. So many times organizations are contributing, but they are not aware. So this allows that recognition, but also gives a baseline with opportunities to do more and to do better, Again, here I invite everyone to take the self-assessment and see where you are today. Another very important aspect of becoming a stronger player in sustainable development is how we communicate our work, how we communicate what we are doing. Here I'm showing the world map put forward by IFLA, so the International Federation of Library Associations, where they have case studies from different countries around the world. So you can see the countries there in green. And each case study is a story of a library and how this library is contributing to one or more sustainable development goals. I think it will be really great, in case if doesn't exist yet, I'm not aware, if we could have similar thing for the archives. No kind of case studies showcasing how archives around the world are already contributing to sustainable development. And I'm sure there's ways to contribute across the different SDGs, as you can see here for the library. So that aspect of communicating what we do from the sustainable development perspective is very important. Another important aspect to strengthen ourselves as players and strengthen our contribution to sustainable development is to look for intersectoral partnerships. Can we, heritage sector, partner with other sectors, such as education, such as environment, such as human development, or etc., creative industries? Can we establish these intersectoral partnerships and put our collections to a stronger use through these partnerships? Here's an example in Brazil, it's my home country, where the Ministry of Culture partnered with the Ministry of Health and with the National Library at the center to create and curate a memorial of the COVID pandemic with the aspiration to address the well-being, to address the health of the population, to educate people for good health, but also to provide information for the most vulnerable, the historically excluded people, to provide education for good health through partnerships. So here you can see the different SDGs that this intersectoral partnership is addressing. And it's a very powerful way also, for archives, for any collections-based organization to strengthen its position and its contribution. Another aspect is to advocate for greater recognition and inclusion of archives of our work in sustainable development-oriented policies. And here is also very important to have policy papers, position papers, recognizing the relevance of archives, importance of the work of archives for sustainable development, and supporting that in terms of informing policies. So to bring what we do more and more at the policy level, but geared to sustainable development policies. In other words, to insert the work of the archives of the heritage sector into sustainable development oriented policies. We don't see that much. So it will be very important to start to embed more our contribution as a sector to sustainable development oriented policies at national and international level. And before finishing, I think the last aspect here is how can we position or reposition ourselves as archives, but also as a sector in terms of reporting what we do to the United Nations. So as you know, each country that signed up to the Agenda 2030 has to submit what is called a voluntary national review every year or every couple of years. From my perspective, heritage is not there. It's very rare to see cultural heritage, archives, libraries, museums in these reviews, which means that our work has not been factored in terms of our country's contributions to the Agenda 2030. So I think it's very important, again, to identify in each country who is the focal point for the UN, for this voluntary report, and then go and establish a constructive dialogue, approach these people and say, we want to be included, we can contribute, this is how we can contribute, so that we, as I said, reposition ourselves. And that will mean also will be more recognized as important players for sustainable development. So I think my time is up. I see Jorgen there on screen, and I thank you very much for your attention. Glad to take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jose Luis. And actually, I can see the applause coming in, well deserved. Thank you. Just a reminder to everyone, we will take questions at the end of our session after all 4 speakers have presented their presentation. At the moment, there aren't any questions in the Q&A section. Please do make sure you pop those in there. They will be more difficult to be picked up under chat, even though we try to keep track of those. Make sure you put those into Q&A. This now leads us to our next speaker. Lotte Wijsman is a preservation researcher at the National Archives of the Netherlands, and her work spans projects on significant properties, environmental sustainability, flash content on web archives, and social media archiving. Currently, she also co-organizes the Bits and Bots study group, which empowers archivists with coding skills. And this study group received the 2024 Digital Preservation Award for Teaching and Communications from the Digital Preservation Coalition. Lotte's talk today on balancing the growth of our digital repository and sustainability at the National Archives of the Netherlands explores the challenges of squaring the circle of the growing digital infrastructure of a national archive whilst aiming to meet environmental targets of reducing the organization's CO2 footprint. And I welcome Lotte to her presentation. Over to you, Lotte.
Thank you, Jürgen. I will start sharing my screen. Hopefully that still works. Yes, it does. Okay, great. So yes, I will be talking today about balancing the growth of our digital repository and sustainability at the National Archives of the Netherlands. So very short, my name is Lotte Wijsman. I am preservation researcher at the National Archives, and yes, I am the preservation researcher, but I am also part of the core team working on sustainability at the National Archives. And this team has members from all departments, also my department, me, which is really interesting because some of us are working with the physical archives, some of us are working with the digital archives, and some of us are working on just the building and hosting people there and the reading room. So it's a very nice group to be part of. And everyone part of that group is also very intrinsically motivated to work on sustainability, which also leads us to having not enough time to work on this as we like to, because yeah, it's not our primary job or function. So at the National Archives, we have sustainability targets, as we are part of the Dutch government. So there's 2 that are most important there. So the first one is the Dutch Climate Agreement from 2019. And this says that in 2030, we should have a 55% reduction in national greenhouse gas emissions. This is actually 49%, but also the Dutch Climate Agreement says we should prepare for more. So they bumped it up to 55%. And then eventually in 2050, we should be carbon neutral. But this goes primarily for the building, which we hope to be carbon neutral in 2050 already, which will be very quick, I think. And then we also have the Dutch Raw Materials Agreement, which says that in 2030, we want to reduce the use of resources by 50%, and in 2050 have a waste-free economy. So those are quite steep targets to make, especially seeing all the changes that we are currently seeing in the archives. So let me find my mouse there. Yes. So this is these are the stats of the National Archives. So we have 114,000 requested items in the reading room per year, this is. Then we have 85 miles of paper, 15 million photographs, 300,000 maps and drawings. And then very important is the 1.2 petabyte of digital data. And this does not seem like a lot, and it is not a lot actually. But this will change rapidly in the coming years. And what we wanted to do is get a baseline already, because we can see the change happening. So it's very essential for us to have a baseline going to see what is going to happen and how that works. So as the Dutch National Archives, we have the Public Records Act from 1995, yes, which states that, so we are the National Archives, but we don't archive ourselves. So the ministries, they archive their own records, they do their own thing, and then they have a transfer period. So in 20 years' time, so 20 years after the creation of a record or information object, they have to transfer to us. This also means that we are currently still sort of living in 2004. So a lot of digital material hasn't been transferred yet. And they're also quite hesitant to do it because it's quite difficult and they haven't done it before. So it's a little bit of a hurdle there. So there will be a great influx of digital material there. And then also we have our digitization department, which is scanning a lot and making sure that everything is digitized. A lot of the archives from the Second World War, for instance. So those two things are making it so that we can see sort of a wave of data coming towards us in the coming years. And we already see a lot of changes happening. That first we had a lot of PDFs coming our way. And now what we can see is that there's also geodata coming our way. Web archives, a lot of them. The Dutch government has about 1,800 websites. Those should be archived almost daily. So that is a lot of data coming our way. And then also social media archiving, of course, is coming our way. But there's a lot of different things happening there. So that 1.2 petabyte will grow exponentially in the coming years, we expect. So what is our current baseline then? So we worked together with a company, an organization, Copper8, that helped us to see what our total impact in carbon emissions was. And it's 3,879 tons of CO2 equivalent. So I did some calculations because that number means, well, maybe it means something to some of you, but for others, like myself, it's nice to have it in trees. So I've converted it to oak trees. One oak tree stores about 19 kilograms of CO2 per year, which brings us to 205,238 oak trees, which is a lot of trees. And we had several themes going. So food and drink was one, energy was one, and IT and data storage is also one of the themes that we worked on. And IT and data storage is about 90% of this, which is quite a lot. And then if we look, it's approximately 80% of that is our business environment. So think of the website, the digital repository. And 20% of that is the workplace environment. So the screen I'm currently working on, my work laptop. So there is a lot of effort or emissions in IT and data storage already. And of course, IT and data storage also weighs heavily on other environmental and social impact indicators, because the laptop, it uses metals. It can be critical toxic materials as well. So there's also a lot to win there already. And this will grow more. I just talked about the 1.2 petabytes, that this is still quite a low number for National Archives, and that it will grow. And Copper8 also predicted that per terabyte of growth in data storage, the CO2 equivalent emissions will grow by 0.12 tons. And per petabyte, this will mean an increase of 120 tons of CO2 equivalent, which currently is about 15% of the total impact of the National Archives. So this wave of data, it will have a big impact that we certainly know of. So They also worked with us on some initiatives. And these initiatives were mostly from other themes, so not the IT and data storage, but the themes such as food and drinks, mobility, energy. And some of the things that were suggested was adding solar panels to the roof, but also a more flexible physical depot, the climate and humidity control. So instead of saying it needs to be 19 degrees Celsius, for instance, I'm just saying a random number out here, by the way. I don't work in the physical archives. But instead of saying that it needs to be exactly that, they're saying it can be more of a fluctuating environment to move with the seasons, which is also will save a lot of CO2 emissions. Then also they're saying more sustainable procurement of hardware. We have people working on procurement, and it's more about having sustainability as a factor in that. It already kind of was, but not enough. And now we can see with procurement that it is becoming more important, and sustainability is really factored in there. And also less single-use packaging with food and drinks. So we're all working with our own cups, and instead of just having a cup that you throw away after from carton or plastic. So we're really working on those small initiatives. And those are sort of the easier ones as well. And then the business environment, which is, of course, the big one. It's the most difficult one as well. And even Copper 8, who have a lot of experience working with sustainability, had only one initiative noted, making the digital archive more sustainable. But then the question is, how? How do we do this? And it's really difficult. And I will not say that we at the National Archives have all the answers of this, but we do have some ideas on how to do it. But they're generally quite difficult to do because they ask you to know the entire infrastructure. We're also part of the government. So for instance, server rooms, they're not at the National Archives, they're part of the government data center. So that makes it more difficult to deal with that. But we do have some low-level ideas, I must say. So the one thing that I always want to really emphasize is that quality goes first. So when we talk to our colleagues who are not that involved in sustainability, when we talk to them, oftentimes we get, yes, but quality goes first. And I always want to make sure that we also emphasize that yes, we want to be more sustainable, but also we have a job at National Archives to give people quality, to give them access to the archives, but also to have the information objects well, in good quality, in a good file format, and everything like that. Sometimes it's really a juxtaposition for me to be working in preservation, making sure that everything is the best quality, and then also sustainability, where sometimes people think that you're not trying to do that. So one thing that I will always say is do not compromise the quality of information objects themselves. And this is very important. And I think people also forget that sometimes something that looks very easy could be very difficult at the end. We had an example of our digitization department who were doing TIFF file format TIFF, and then they moved to JPEGs, and they said, well, it's more sustainable. And yes, that may be the point because TIFF is the size is much bigger, but then also they break more easily. A JPEG can break more easily. So then you have to look at the process, that if you have to digitize or scan it again, you have the entire process again, which is also not very sustainable. So it's better sometimes to have something that's a bit heavier at the start instead, and then you can save in the long run by not having it break. So it's very important that you do not compromise on the quality of information objects themselves. Then I think a very important one is working more efficiently. I think that is the most easy one actually to really look at, because it also it's not only for sustainability, but it's also just for your daily work. It can be better to work more efficiently. And for that, we need to look critical at our processes. And for that, I would love to turn you to the article by Keith Pendergrass, Toward Environmentally Sustainable Digital Preservation. where he points out a lot of things that you can do and look critical at to be more environmentally sustainable. So you can implement practices that increase energy efficiency, but also year or month, or do you want to spread them out more? Then the other one is you can look at accessibility. Look at your website, for instance. Our website is quite heavy. Are there things that we can do better? And also, do people need to have the highest quality of scan available, or can we sort of nudge them towards a lower quality one, which would also work fine for them? So that are things that we can look at. And then just look at efficiency at creation. So what I just said, do it once, but do it properly. And an example for this was I'm working on social media archiving, and we often hear, okay, so you do the heritage thing, and then we do the government thing. But that leads us to having two versions of the same thing instead of one good version. So I think in conversations such as these, we can also bring that sustainability factor to the table. So there are a lot of things that we can start doing already in a bottom-up strategy by looking at our own processes that we use daily. And this is not only for sustainability, but it's also more efficient and can save cost. And I will not say that it is done. It's, I think, far from done, and we have a lot of work to do, but these small steps can really lead to a snowball effect. And I think we're quite lucky to be at the start, sort of, in terms of digital. So we can make these changes already, and they will help us in the long run. And that is my presentation for today. 15 minutes, sort of, almost. If you have any question, I would love to hear them. And yeah, reach out, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Lotte. Perfect timing. My alarm was about to go off, so I could just switch it off before it rang into the presentation. Just a quick reminder, questions are coming in. We've got 5 questions at the moment. We'll take them at the end. Keep putting them into the Q&A section rather than the chat. And this now takes us to our next speaker, Era Tansey, an archivist, researcher, and consultant based in Cincinnati, the Ohio River watershed. Era is the founder of Memory Rising, an organization which provides research, consulting, and archival services with expertise in climate change, environmental and labor movements, and Ohio Valley regional history. ERA's research on archives and climate change has been profiled and recognized widely. ERA's talk, titled Climate Change Impact to American Archives and Archivists, explores how archives in the United States address the two intertwined existential problems of preparing for climate change and fully staffing archives. ERA will look at the challenges and risks to archives and how data and workforce issues are essential to understanding tackling climate change and adaptation for archives. And with that, Era, over to you.
Jürgen, I just want to make sure you can hear me, right? Because my internet literally just disappeared about 5 minutes ago.
I can certainly hear you very well.
Okay, good. Let's all cross our fingers that that doesn't happen again during my presentation, and my sincere advance apologies if it does. So hopefully that won't happen again. Good morning, everyone. My name is Era Tansey, and it's pretty early in the morning where I am here in the middle of the United States. So I'm still waking up a little bit, but I'm so honored to be here and have really enjoyed the presentations that I've heard so far. So I've been working on climate change and archives, specifically in the American context, for about a decade now. And I'm going to talk about the importance of open data for this work, and also the issue of staffing, which is something that I think can often be left out of these conversations. So one of the studies that I was involved with several years ago was the first study that attempted to quantify where are the most at-risk archives in the United States when we consider all of the climate change risks that exist. So of course, this typically involves temperature and humidity risks, but it also, for our colleagues who live and work in coastal areas, it also can bring up hurricane risks, flooding risks, and sea level rise and storm surge risks. And actually, we are starting to see more inland flooding risks as well in the United States as hurricanes make their way further inland. This is something that we saw a couple months ago with an inland part of the United States, North Carolina, that got hurricanes. And that is not typically a place where we see hurricanes going that far inland, but it caused a lot of floods. So in order to do any kind of risk assessment for archives, you need data about where archives are located. So when we did that study in 2018, we had about 1,200 archives from a list supplied by the organization OCLC. And as we were doing that research, one of the things that I was finding was that we had this good data, but it mainly represented larger archives. And in the United States, we have a lot of very small archives across our communities that were not necessarily on this list that we had from OCLC. So one of my collaborators and I realized that we needed to eventually work on a better data set of archives that would include those smaller archives. So what we did was we put together a grant that was funded by the Society of American Archivists, and this was called Repo Data. And what we did was we contacted over 150 archival associations. So in the United States, because our archives are very decentralized, unlike other countries, we do not have like a central cultural ministry. Lots of archivists here belong to multiple archival associations. So for example, where I live, which is in the city of Cincinnati and the state of Ohio and the region of the Midwest, I belong to a group called the Cincinnati Area Archivists, the Society of Ohio Archivists, the Midwest Archives Conference, and the Society of American Archivists. So that is very common for archivists in the United States to belong to multiple archival associations. And so what we did to build this better data set was we contacted over 150 archival associations across the country. And we asked for any lists they had of archives in their jurisdiction. And as a result, we got a ton of data, and we got over 18,000 points that we could put on a map. So we started mapping that. And we've also made that data available to the public through a website called GitHub, which is like a open source website where people can often share computer code, but we also shared our data sets there. So again, before this project, this is the largest list of archives available in the United States. It was about 1,200 archives. Each dot is an archive. But after we did this repo data project, we had 18,000 locations. So that's obviously a huge, huge difference. And what we were able to find about most of these archives was that most of them are quite small. So we have a lot of what are called historical societies. These are often run by unpaid volunteers. So there are places where, you know, maybe a neighborhood sets up like a historical organization and they have archives in there. A lot of these are small museums. Then we have government archives that exist at the many levels of decentralized government we have in the United States. We have a very strong system of public libraries in the US, so many of them have archives. And most of our major colleges and universities also have archives as well. So we have archives across all sorts of different sectors. And trying to get the data on that is what this project was able to accomplish. So in order to understand where climate risks are happening, again, you have to understand where archives are. So this is a a map that I did a few years ago during hurricane season in the United States, where I was able to take the hurricane track and see what were the archives in sort of where the hurricane was heading. But also, if you want to understand risks much further out than just hurricane season, you can also use this data for this. So this animation is a sea level rise animation representing, I think, about 6 feet of sea level rise in Charleston, South Carolina. So again, each of these orange dots is an archive. You can see how many of them are projected to potentially be impacted by sea level rise. And depending on the science, most scientific assessments are saying this level of sea level rise that you are seeing in this animation could potentially be possible by the year 2100. So again, having that data not only exist in the first place, but making it available to the public is really essential for moving the progress forward on assessing risk. So because we put that data into GitHub, it is now being used by other researchers. So there is a research team at Louisiana State University, which is located in the Gulf South of the United States. This is not that far from where Hurricane Katrina happened in New Orleans. And that team is taking our data set as well as data from museums and libraries and putting together a new major climate change risk assessment tool for all of the United States libraries, archives, and museums. So this is a really big project, and I'm also working on the advisory board for this project. So when we talk about climate change impacts to archives, which some of my colleagues this morning have already mentioned, we're often thinking about collections and infrastructure, but I also want to make sure that we do not lose sight of the people, because I often find that we kind of are not always paying as much attention to archives users and archive staff and how they are impacted by climate change. So two specific examples I want to pull out here are that in the United States, a lot of archives maintain vital records. So these are records of like birth, death, marriage, or property records. And if you are impacted by a disaster in the United States, in order to receive government assistance, you often need to provide copies of those vital records. So in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, archives are often called upon to provide those records for people who need government assistance. The second thing where this really impacts people is that in the United States, we have very serious labor issues, and many archives are dependent on temporary labor. So these are positions that only last for 1, 2, or 3 years at the most. They are often dependent on non-permanent sources of funding, like grant funding from funding agencies. And so as archives are becoming more dependent on temporary labor, they are losing institutional knowledge for how to deal with emergencies and disasters. So to give you a sense of how challenging the labor situation has become in the United States, I want to share, we have a lot of good research coming out about this. So the New England Archivists, which is the northeastern part of the United States, they did a study showing that half of recent job postings are for temporary positions. So not permanent positions, but temporary positions. The Council of State Archivists, which represents archivists who work in state government, which is sort of the level below the federal level in the United States. Not most, but many state archives have lost a large number of their employees since the 1990s. Then a couple of years ago, many of America's large archival associations coordinated to conduct a major census of America's archivists. And there were some pretty alarming findings which showed how many archivists were thinking about leaving the profession due to burnout and due to the inability to find a good, secure job. And part of that census also asked archives administrators, what are their biggest challenges? And those administrators answered that 71% of them answered that staffing is their biggest challenge. So when we think about the fact that archives, often do not have a lot of resources to begin with, they are facing increasing disasters. They are facing more severe disasters due to climate change, and they don't have necessarily the staff to deal with that. That is why this is becoming a huge challenge in the United States, which is how do archives deal with what is already happening and what we know the future includes if our staffing issues are so dire already at this point. So that's where a lot of my work is concentrating on now. And this has culminated in a publication that I wrote last year called A Green New Deal for Archives. And the New Deal terminology is really important in the United States because that's a reference to the programs under President Franklin Roosevelt during the 1930s to lift the United States out of the Great Depression and massive unemployment that was happening about a century ago. So there's a revival of this now in the United States saying, if we have a New Deal today, and we make it green so we can deal with climate change, that also deals with our severe inequality in this country. And so I wrote this publication called A Green New Deal for Archives, which is saying, if we want to deal with climate change in America's archives, we have to deal with our staffing issues too, because we cannot be prepared for climate change unless we have staffing at America's archives that are ready to rise to the challenge. So that's sort of a 10,000-foot view of what is happening here in the United States and what we're trying to do to deal with it. And I work pretty publicly. So if you are interested in getting in touch with me, this is more about how you can find me. And hopefully my internet stayed strong during this presentation. I'll be happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Era. And yes, your internet did stay stable. You can see the applause coming in. I think we could hear you all throughout your presentation.
Thank you.
And again, just a reminder, Q&A is the place to pop in your questions. There are 5 in there at the moment. I'm sure there will be more towards the end of today's session. And that takes us to our final speaker for today. Ana Flavia Magalhães is Director General of the National Archives of Brazil, Secretariat of the Ministry of Management and Innovation in Public Services, and President of the National Council of Archives in Brazil. A coordinator of the working group on community archives at the Latin American Association of Archives. She's also a historian with an interdisciplinary background in communication and literature, and a professor in the Department of History and the postgraduate program in human rights at the University of Brasilia. Ana Flavia's talk today on Archives for a Dignified Future, Challenges Faced by Individuals and Institutions in Overcoming Inequalities in Brazil, explores archives' social role, which goes beyond organizing and promoting access to information contained in records about the experiences of different human groups and other forms of life in multiple territories. Ana Flavia states that archives are strategic institutions in the reproduction or overcoming of inequalities. And addressing a set of Brazilian experiences, this presentation analyzes the challenges ahead of us, not only as a technological transformation of archives, but also intrinsically linked to the UNESCO's sustainability development goals. And I think here we can kind of see also the circle closing between José Luis's first presentation and now Ana Flavia's at the end of our session. So over to you, Ana Flavia.
Thank you. Good morning, or another greetings for you. I would like to thank my colleague Rita Tijenfu for inviting me to join the fun virtual colloquium on archival matters 2024. In particular, I am so grateful for the opportunity to discuss a challenge that concerns us all, which is the promoting of a sustainable future, even more so considering the existence and whole of archives in the plural. Encouraged by the announcement of the theme of International Archives Week 2025, archives are accessible archives for everyone. I think it's important to highlight that any effective commitment to building a sustainable future must have as a non-negotiable foundation the principle that to be sustainable, the society of the future needs to be viable for all forms of life. As the Afro-Brazilian forestry engineer and activist Angela Gomes warns us, it's not about acting in opposition between the human species versus other forms of life and elements of nature, not resource only. It's necessary to learn to embrace life in this respectful coexistence between the many and different in permanent constructions of balance. The climate crisis scenario has forced us to think about this more often than we did 20 years ago, even though we don't have the answers to most of our questions. Given the constant need to deal with disasters and emergencies, as happened recently in Brazil due to heavy rains in Rio Grande do Sul, we may lack the focus to explain the importance of memory support for the formulation of possible futures for everyone. This is the central point of my considerations for these discussions. How can we work towards repositioning archives on the human development agenda linked to the values expressed in the Sustainable Development Goals? Archives, as was said, play a social role that goes beyond organizing and promoting access to information contained in records about the experience of different human groups and other forms of life in multiple territories. The way we structure and update memory matrices in our society is directly linked to patterns that guide choice of individual and collective priorities. This in turn is expressed in public policies created to deal with production, use, and distribution of research and rights. Therefore, archives are strategic institutions in the reproduction or overcoming of inequalities. Precisely for these reasons, it's possible to say that archives are directly involved in the 17, or in some countries, 18 Sustainable Development Goals. It may seem that there is a leap in the argument, which is true to some extent given the speaking time available, but in fact, the connection is very close, as José Luis showed. Let's read some of the Sustainable Development Goals and see whether or not the archives are fundamental to support and promoting proposals and actions. No poverty, 1. 4. Quality education. 5. Gender equality. 7. Affordable and clean energy. 10. Reduced inequalities. 11. Sustainable cities and communities. 13. Climate actions. 16. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. 17. Partnerships for the goals. And 18. Some countries have presented proposals to SDG 18 in their voluntary national reports according to their political priorities. India proposed a SDG on local empowerment and rural development, and Costa Rica did one about people's happiness and well-being. In September 2023, during the United Nations General Assembly, the Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva announced the voluntary adoption of a 18 objective towards achieving ethnic racial equality. All these objectives and those not mentioned here allow us to discuss the challenges not only for the technological transformation of archives, but also for the self-involvement of professionals and users in promoting a set of sustainable practices. Moving forward on Brazilian case, specifically from the National Archives, we have been working in dialogue with the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in an international cooperation aimed at developing and incorporating methodologies and innovations present in the field of knowledge on reducing inequalities, the fragility of citizenship to allow access of information, memory, and country's history. The National Archives became part of the structure of Ministry of Management and Innovation in Public Services in January 2023 under the management of Ministry Esther Dweck, gaining the status of Secretariat. This is a ministry dedicated to developing solutions that strengthen the Brazilian state's capacity to build a fairer society, not just for a group of Brazilians, but for the entire nation. It develops public policies aimed at the digital transformation of the state and governance strategies. Thus, cooperation with UNDP is aimed at contributing to the achievement of national commitments associated with the SDG 10, 16, or even 17, and others. This international technical cooperation is connected to the values that structure the Sustainable Development Goals as it aims to contribute to improve the governance and effectiveness of the institutions that make up the National Archives system. This approach contributes to creating a society whose population is more aware of these rights and responsibilities while recognizing access to information as an essential tool for promoting the maturity of democracy. The search for results is organized on the premise that access to information and ensuring its dissemination among the population are imperative for the preservation of memory recognized as a human right. In this way, we design a governance matrix through which society has the opportunity to assess innovative actions to promote critical and comprehensive historical literacy and thus expand the repertoire of possibilities for the formulation and more informed, effective public policies that are in line with the desires of Brazilian people. The cooperation technically supports unprecedented efforts by the Brazilian state to integrate into the National Archives policies initiatives for memory of historically neglected segments that have become evident in the routines of public, private, and increasingly community archives. The latter are initiatives that originate from the concern of social groups with their own documentary records produced on their own needs and are strategies for identity, empowerment, and social visibility. They are strongly represented in these groups whose memory has been underestimated. Indigenous people, traditional communities, the Black population, LGBTQIA plus groups, social movements, women, etc. With the subsidies prepared to the scope of this project, the Brazilian government seeks to qualify the conditions for the incidence of National Archives councils. Furthermore, there is a declared encouragement for diversity of narratives based on access to and use of archives documents, ensuring that different perspectives of gender, race, and regionality are represented. In this sense, as they promote the constructions of more plural collective memory that is closer to the reality of the country's social formation. The subjects mobilized by the archives can act strongly in achieving the variety of sustainable development goals. We are talking about a long journey full of uncertainties, but we believe that this is a promising path to ensure the legitimacy and continuity of the archives in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ana Flavia. That was a brilliant insight into your work and your thinking around the societal importance of archives well, in Brazil, but probably also around the world. So we've had, I think, 4 fantastic speakers. We've had Jose Luis presenting his thoughts around archives and the UNESCO sustainability goals and some of the tools that are already available to us and how they can be linked to archives works. We've had Lotte talking about the National Archives of the Netherlands journey to becoming a sustainable archives, their sustainability strategy, and where they are on this journey, and with a particular view on digital assets. And we've had Era talking about the impact of climate change on archives, and the pressing issues around staffing archives to respond to the challenges provided by climate change. And I've just at the beginning had a brief summary of Anna Flavia's presentation. We've got 15 to 20 minutes time for some questions, and there are a number of questions already in the Q&A section. I will try to go through these as much as we can and see if we can get the panel to answer those. I believe everybody from the panel is now back on camera, and you can unmute when you're ready for your answers. There's a question coming from Jill Fewings, a question for Lotte. She's asking, there's a gap between document creation and acquisition by the archive. Is that right? How do we ensure that the digital data survives to be transferred? And we don't really know how long websites will last, for example. And I just wonder, Lotte, whether you could comment on that.
Yes, so yes, that is correct. There is a gap between the creation and then the transfer to us. We have noticed this gap already with some web archives that have been created very creatively as well. So we are currently moving more to the front. So we are advising the ministries on how to do it properly. So to follow the standards for one. So for web archives, a simple example would be to do it in a work file format that adheres to the standards. So we are doing a lot to advise the ministries and help them to make sure everything survives, and not only survives, but is in good quality when it reaches us. So there's a lot of effort going into that.
That's great. Thanks, Lotte. There's another question from Jill. Well, it's a question, but also maybe an encouragement. She's referring to single-use packaging. She says, so I assume Jill's organization are a very small archive with no budget at the moment. When we heard of a larger archive that was upgrading its packaging, we collected it from them to use for ourselves. It was fine for our purpose, and maybe there could be more of this type of collaboration. I've got a couple of thoughts on that myself in a minute, but I just wonder whether anybody on the panel would like to comment on that as well. Maybe how can we collaborate more effectively on issues around sustainability? Any of the speakers who would like to?
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Thank you. So I think, one thing we have seen here in our work is when we talk about sustainability, so 99% of the organizations perceive that as environmental sustainability. So one thing we would like to invite everybody to reflect, and the SDGs are a framework, is to see how can we go beyond the environment. But also how can we connect and communicate what we are already doing in the environmental sphere in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a very clear example of addressing SDG 12 that talks about sustainable consumption and production. But oftentimes, when archives organizations, they engage on this type of environmental sustainability, there's no obvious links to the SDGs. And I think that's a missed opportunity for everyone when you communicate what you're doing in terms of energy efficiency, waste management, etc. Try to find a link to the kind of non-relevant SDGs, try to look at the targets that are more specific and tell your story using also the SDG as a reference, because I think that would really help strengthen the organization and strengthen the perception that we as a sector, we can contribute and we are contributing to sustainable development. This is my reflection there. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Anybody else from the panel who would like to respond to that?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think it's really good to work together and to collaborate a lot. And I think what Jose was also saying, it's very beneficial if you share what you have done. And it doesn't even matter how small it is, but try to connect with all the other people working on this and try and use the sources that are already out there. For myself, we have the Dutch Digital Heritage Network in the Netherlands. That they also have a green IT working group. I'm also part of that. And that really helps us to exchange information. And I think, yeah, collaboration is definitely the way to go, because I don't think one archive can solve it alone or one party. So it needs to be a collaboration.
Yeah, and if I can just come in on that, there was actually a comment in the chat asking that ICA should create a working group around sustainability, and one of the reasons I'm chairing this session today is that I am actually one of the 4 co-chairs of ICA's very recently established climate change working group with the broader remit around sustainability. I will use my closing remarks at the end of the session to highlight a little bit more around this work, what the group's aims are and how people can participate. And so there might well be more room for any of you listening to this today to come together through this group and enhance the collaboration across the archive sector around the globe. And then I would like to go to the next question from Tom Nesmith. Is there any difference in environmental impact between commercial cloud storage for digital archives and in-house or on-premise storage? I guess this is mostly aimed at Lotte. Lotte, if you would like to answer that one.
Yes, there definitely is. I just mentioned the Green IT working group that I'm part of, and there was also research done there. Yes, cloud storage is better oftentimes in terms of environmental impact because they have more, because all the servers are used up until the 100% mark, and they are really based on efficiency. So that is oftentimes better organized than in-house. For us, it's a bit more difficult because cloud is not one thing we are going towards very soon because we're the government, of course. So we are part of the governmental data centers then. But yeah, there is a significant difference there. And then also you can look at different types of storage. I believe from the research from the top of my head, I think there's a link there that I could share with the ICA as well. That tape storage, for instance, is also really good for environmental impact on lowering that, I must say. So that is, you can also look at those types of things that sometimes you would need a server, but you can also look into tape for other things. But it is really looking critical at your current processes and practices.
Thank you.
Can I
yes,
respond
absolutely.
to this as well? I get asked this question a lot, and I think in the context of the United States where I am located, this is a very fraught question because 80% of the United States electricity consumption still comes from fossil fuels. So when I get asked this question in my particular context, I always tell people like, well, it depends on where your on-prem storage is getting its electricity from. Because if you're in California and you're using solar power on site, then it might be better to do it on-prem. But if you are in a place where your local institution is getting a lot of its electricity from burning coal or natural gas, then sometimes something like Amazon Web Servers, which do publish their carbon footprint reports for storage in the United States, that might end up being a better option. So it just, you kind of have to know your, like what your local electricity sources are versus what a vendor might offer.
Great, thank you, Era. The next couple of questions are also, I think, for Lotte. One is asking
I would like to say.
Oh, sorry. I did. Yeah.
It's a very short speak. We are working with DataPrev, a public technology company in Brazil, for that digital preservation strategies in clouds does it not compromise the security and the sovereignty of our national heritage, because we know in reason of the huge demand of documents that a country like Brazil has, is not a question in this time and for the future, not for the only one institutions. So in this case, we are changing how the National Archives is working with other public institutions to create these solutions, because it's so hard. We cannot send our heritage for private companies, but we have to work with this scenario. So it's a now is a state questions for Brazilian government.
Thank you very much. There was one question for Lotte, whether you could share maybe a link to the article you've referenced around digital preservation and sustainability. Maybe you could do that in the chat function. Or
Jose already did that.
Okay, I've missed that. Thank you very much. That's great. We've got about 7 minutes left in today's session. I can't promise we get through all the questions. There's certainly a question for around Era's talk, whether would people agree that part of the problem with staff morale is the lack of public understanding and of what archives really do and their value, and that might also link to Ana Flavia's presentation. So I wonder if the two of you would want to share your thoughts.
Well, in the United States context, I think that is part of it, but it's not all of it. In the US in particular, we have very few labor protections. So I think that some of the challenges also come from the fact that we have a lot of people working in archives who do not have benefits, meaning even like health insurance for some of their jobs. So we, so yes, there is some of the like public ignorance of the importance of archives, and I think that filters through with archives not receiving the funding that they need in order to be fully operational. But I think even sometimes within archives that might have resources, there might be management that is operating in a way that burns out employees. I think there are a lot of factors. Certainly public perception is part of it, but I don't think it explains all of it. And some of those studies that I mentioned delve deeper into those explanatory factors.
Thank you very much. Ana Flavia, any thoughts you wanted to share on this as well? No? You're mute at the moment. I couldn't hear you because you're muted.
No, I just said we are always working in the same direction of Tansei said, but I don't have any more explanation now because we have a long history for this moment.
Okay, thank you very much. There are a few questions, questions to, or more kind of requests, I should say, to make sure this session today, which has been recorded, will also be made available. I'm assuming so, but the ICA team, I'm sure, will be able to answer that. There are some comments around complimenting Jose Luis and team at ICROM for their work, and there's an interest in learning more about the ICA climate change group, and I think that's probably my cue to talk a little bit about that before we conclude today's session. Yes, indeed, ICA just recently this year initiated the creation of a new climate change working group, and it provides a forum for the archival community to come together to reflect, share ideas, identify gaps in knowledge, and to collaborate in formulating collective responses to the questions and challenges faced by archives and its professionals arising from climate change. We have 4 key areas, and each one of those is chaired by a climate change working group co-chair, which are Eric Chen from Singapore, Claudio August Bilbao, currently working at the University of Liverpool, and then there is Cécile Fabrice from the Archives Nationales in Paris, and I'm Jürgen, and I'm based at the National Archives in the UK. And the 4 areas, the 4 key focus areas this working group is working on are: how can archives develop strategies to achieve better environmental sustainability? How climate change affects archives and what can be done to prepare for this? How the environmental impact of archival operations can be reduced, and how archives document climate change and enable research to understand and mitigate it. And the objectives of the working groups are to the collation of best practices for the creation of practical toolkits, and by no means are we there to reinvent the wheel. As we know, we've just seen all the work Jose Luis has been referring to, it done by ICROM. We're really trying to bring things together and to repurpose as much as we can, as that's already out there. It's the organization of forums and workshops to promote awareness and knowledge sharing. We will definitely be present at ICA's Congress in Barcelona next year, so watch the space in that area. The formation of vibrant communities of practice for real-time problem solving, and the consideration of an ICA statement on climate action and environmental sustainability. Membership to this is open to any interested ICA individual members and employees of institutional members, and I think it might be really worth trying to get in touch with ICA after today's session. If any of you, any of your organizations might want to join the any of the working groups key areas in the work streams, that would be very much appreciated. There will be more communication around this. There will be an email address also shared to get in touch. So I think this is quite a timely formation of this working group, and hopefully kick-starting it off next year at the Congress. This will invite a lot of collaboration around the globe, and will be quite productive. And with that, I would like to thank our speakers today: Jose Luis Pedersoli, Lotte Weismann, Ana Flavia Magayan, and Era Tangzai, and for their excellent presentations. I would also like to thank everybody for making my life very easy by not having to remind anybody of the time and really sticking to the time frame. I would like to thank ICA and FAN for inviting us to present today and to have these sessions. And I would like to thank our interpreters, Irene, Christina and Agnes, for their excellent live interpretation of today's session. And I think Rita is going to have some closing remarks before we finally end.
Thank you very much, Jürgen, for moderating the session, as well as Era, Lotte, Jose Luis, and Anna for their excellent presentation. As today's presentation showed, more than ever, archival institution has to collaborate with each other, but also reaching out to other organizations as well. As Jose Luis' presentation showed, we have to communicate, we have to show the activities we are conducting with other partners as well. Having said that, I hope that the virtual FAN colloquium also have contributed to start the conversation and collaboration further between archival professional as well as archival institution. As Jürgen mentioned, there is an ICA working group on climate change, and I'm sure the participants today can gather information on the ICA website or reach out to Eric Shin and Jürgen Vervoort. For next year activities, FAN also has several virtual events, and for sure we will present that and share this with you. If you have any ideas, please reach out to us and let us know what your priorities and interests are as our FAN membership, as ICA members as well. For now, I also want to thank you and also wish you all happy holidays, be safe, and be sure to also attend our webinar again next year. Thank you very much, Jürgen, speakers, and all participants, and also interpreters and ICA Secretariat. Thank you very much for today's session. Thank you. Goodbye.